Albert Carter had moved to the serene mountain community of Forest Ridge for peace and space, but his plans for a quiet retirement were disrupted when he decided to install solar panels on his roof. One minute he was tightening a bracket and the next he had 2 patrol cars in his driveway. The Homeowners Association HOA president Eileen Marlowe had called the police, claiming that his solar panels looked too industrial and posed a fire hazard. Albert was taken aback. He had followed all the necessary permits and codes, and his panels were top of the line, designed to blend seamlessly with his dark roof shingles. Eileen, however, was unyielding, citing a non-existent HOA rule and a fabricated story about a cabin fire caused by do-it-yourself electrical work. She handed him a business card and a cease and desist letter, threatening him with fines and legal action if he didn't comply. Albert was determined not to be intimidated. He pulled out his HOA contract and supplementary documents, flipping through the pages with a highlighter and sticky notes. There was no Rule 15b anywhere in the document. In fact, the rules only went up to 14c, which dealt with mailbox maintenance and snow removal requirements. None of the existing rules mentioned solar installations, energy systems, renewable technology, or anything remotely related to what he was doing on his property. Albert realized that Eileen was trying to pull an elaborate scam using official letterhead and legal-sounding language. He dug deeper into his email archives, finding a message thread from March of the previous year that confirmed his suspicions. Rule 15b had been rejected by the community because it was illegal under county regulations that Albert had helped write. Eileen wasn't just being difficult or overly bureaucratic, she was literally enforcing a rule that didn't exist and had been rejected by the very community she claimed to represent. The next morning, Albert continued his installation, determined not to let petty threats derail his project. Suddenly, he noticed his extension ladder was missing. Not moved to a different location, not knocked over by wind or animals, completely missing from his property. He discovered fresh tire tracks leading away from his property toward the main road. Albert borrowed a ladder from his neighbor and resumed work, but his peace was short-lived. The unmistakable wail of sirens echoed through the mountain valley as 2 police cruisers arrived, their red and blue emergency lights cutting through the peaceful morning. Officer Rodriguez stepped out of his patrol car, informing Albert that they had received a report about unsafe construction practices and immediate fire hazards. Albert was frustrated but produced his permits and professional engineering documentation explaining that everything was up to code and fully permitted through the county. The most frustrating part was trying to explain to his neighbors that everything he was doing was completely legal, safe, and professionally executed. These people didn't know him yet, and all they could see was police cars with flashing lights, official warnings about fire hazards, and emergency protocols being activated in response to his project. After the police left, an elderly man named Hank Porter approached Albert's porch. Hank had been a resident of Forest Ridge for 15 years and had kept detailed records of every incident, emergency, and community event. He revealed that there had never been a cabin fire in the community, not last year, not ever. The only emergency they had was a cat stuck in a tree. Hank had been documenting Eileen's lies and abuse of authority for years and was waiting for someone with Albert's background and resources to challenge her. Albert spent the evening processing the information, determined to expose Eileen's corruption. He searched online for information about Eileen's background and history with the HOA, discovering a pattern of fraudulent consulting fees paid to EM Solutions LLC, owned by Eileen's brother-in-law, Lance Marlowe. The amount was staggering for a community of fewer than 100 homes, and the complete lack of documentation would have made any legitimate municipal accountant reject the expense immediately. Albert's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Eileen's voice was cold and threatening, warning him to stop digging or face the consequences. Albert realized he was onto something big and spent the evening building a case, a wall-sized truth bomb waiting for detonation. He printed every piece of incriminating evidence he'd gathered, organized it chronologically, and used red string to connect the fake rules to the manufactured emergencies to the fraudulent consulting payments. Albert sent a carefully crafted email to every homeowner in the Forest Ridge community, revealing only part of what he'd discovered to bait Eileen into making a mistake. The goal was to make Eileen feel threatened enough to call for some kind of public forum where she could defend her authority, which would give Albert the perfect opportunity to spring the bigger revelation on her with maximum dramatic impact and community witness. Eileen's counterattack email arrived, calling Albert a liar and a danger to property values. She announced an emergency board meeting for the following Thursday evening where she would address these serious concerns in an appropriate public forum. Albert and Hank spent the evening preparing their presentation strategy, organizing the evidence for maximum emotional and logical impact. The night before the meeting, Albert received another anonymous text message threatening to expose a secret from his past. He realized that Eileen had somehow discovered a calculation error he'd made during his second year at the county that had delayed a major infrastructure project and cost taxpayers several thousand in extended contractor fees. Albert was determined not to be intimidated and prepared for the meeting, knowing that he had the evidence to expose Eileen's corruption. Thursday evening arrived and the Forest Ridge Community Center was packed with residents. Eileen was at the main table, surrounded by stacks of official documents and legal binders. Albert was relegated to the back row, feeling the weight of suspicious glances from neighbors who'd been told he was a dangerous troublemaker. Eileen went on to describe Albert as a dangerous outsider who was systematically attacking the institutions that kept their communities safe and prosperous. Hank requested speaking time as a concerned long-term resident with important information for the community. He systematically presented the evidence about fake Rule 15b, showing the original community voting records and the email documentation proving that Eileen had been enforcing a rule that didn't exist and had been specifically voted down by the community itself. The room erupted in outrage as residents demanded answers and called the police. Police officers entered the community center and began approaching the front table. Eileen made one final desperate attempt at intimidation, threatening to expose Albert's past mistakes. Albert realized it was just another lie from someone who had made deception and intimidation her full-time profession. The aftermath of that explosive confrontation unfolded with the kind of swift, decisive justice that you rarely see in real life, but always hope will happen when corruption is finally exposed to the light. Within 15 minutes of Albert's presentation ending, police officers had taken Eileen into custody based on the financial evidence, witness testimony, and what appeared to be a clear case of systematic fraud involving public funds and abuse of fiduciary responsibility. Eileen's brother-in-law's consulting company had its bank accounts frozen, and by the end of the week, the county district attorney had opened a formal investigation into HOA fraud. An emergency election was held, and Hank Porter was unanimously chosen as the new HOA president with a mandate to restore transparency, accountability, and actual community governance to Forest Ridge. Albert completed his solar installation without any interference, delays, or manufactured emergencies. He woke up every morning grateful that he had decided to fight systematic corruption instead of quietly accepting it and hoping someone else would solve the problem. The final irony of this entire experience was that Eileen's desperate attempts to stop his legal, permitted, and environmentally responsible solar installation ended up exposing a fraud scheme that had been stealing from the community for years and destroying the trust that should exist between HOA leadership and the residents they're supposed to serve. Sometimes when you stand up to bullies and demand accountability from people who abuse their authority, you discover that the problem is much bigger than you initially realized. And sometimes, against all odds and despite all the cynicism in the modern world, the good guys really do win in the end.